Welcome to The Growing Band Director, the podcast that dives into topics applying to all of us band directors. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Together, we discuss many aspects of a school band program, including how to build your concert, jazz, and marching programs, as well as everything else we do as band directors. More importantly, we'll discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." Let's get started. Welcome everybody back to The Growing Band Director. We're very pleased to have Barry Saunders with us. Jeff, we haven't done a podcast in a few weeks, it feels like. You did a solo one and I've done a couple solo ones. And how you been?
Great. How are you?
Awesome. Very good. Barry Saunders, the man, the myth, the legend. Thank you very much for being here with us. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Good. The episode today is going to be all about improvisation, jazz improvisation, as well as just general improvisation, steps to help students overcome the fear and embrace the fun. Before we get started, a quick shout out to Banjo Music, Joe Betancourt and Sean Potter. They do amazing work taking instruments and preparing them to be played at a really high level at really low prices for used instruments. So check them out at banjomusic.com. All right, Barry, when I think about people improvising, you're sort of one of the first people that come to mind because you seem to have the ability or the knack to get anybody from the very beginning of their instrument up through super high level professionals improvising and working on improvisation and all that. So you must have a lot of secrets to share with us. Jeff, I know you've had many decades of helping people improvise, right?
Yes.
I've had a career in helping a lot of people improvise, but I know, Barry, this is a specialty of yours. So before we get started, for those people who don't know you, would you give us a little bit of background of Barry Saunders 101, history, philosophy, stuff like that?
Sure. I'm a Maine boy, grew up in Sanford, and went to the University of Southern Maine, studied with Bill Street, and following that, went and got a teaching degree from the University of Southern Maine also, and have taught public school for 25, 26 years or so now. And along the way, just continued to work to become a better and better performer and improviser and musician of all kinds of music. I play classical chamber music and weird free jazz and straight ahead jazz and traditional jazz, all kinds of music, very diverse playing background. And really, when I started teaching, just fell in love with teaching and have stayed with it throughout. And through collaborating with some of my jazz musician friends who I would hire to teach at a band camp, we developed this curriculum, this series of games and exercises for young improvisers that kind of breaks down the panic. It takes kind of the worry away, and it's because there are a lot of fun games that you can do and ways that you can introduce the idea of improvising piecemeal that is really fun and inventive and empowering for the students as opposed to being scary. And I think all of us who have taught public school know our jazz band kids are some of our stronger players generally.
Right.
They're the most engaged in the program. And as they're growing up, they learned a system of how to tell they were doing a good job. And that was playing that B whole note for 4 beats with this fingering at this time, everything written out. And then, so they know how to do that really well. And they've excelled and they've been given the accolades and they've gotten the position to be in jazz band because they did that really well. And then we're like, oh, but now here, we're going to take all that away. Mm-hmm. And you're going to just have to trust me. So it's like, through teaching improvisation, I was able to develop with some of my friends some of these things we're going to talk about.
When you first told me that story, that made a lot of sense. I'd never thought of it that way, but we all picture kids right away who are like, they're really strong musicians, but tell them to improvise and they don't want to. But you're right, they have all the secrets to playing well.
Yeah.
Right? And decoding that for them is a big deal.
Yeah, because that's their identity. They're like, no, I'm good at band. And then when you take away all that they know makes them good at band, that can be scary.
One thing that I love is that you seem to always be focused on the process and the
Yeah.
learning rather than the outcome. You're one of those teachers that always seems to say, yeah, the concert is what it is. That's just a demonstration of how we sound. But I just care about all the stuff they're learning and doing along the way. And
That that's
I, I,
absolutely.
I feel like I've been able to take some of that from you, and you've rubbed off on me in that way, even though I still worry about the final performance too. But you've been a really good influence in that way. So tell us more about that.
That's great, and that comes from this whole idea of removing the fear. If the performance to the student is the point, the end, the result, they're just there's more pressure to do well in a moment, and we know as players that we're human. A performance is just a reflection of who we are in that moment and whether we had enough dinner or whether we ate dinner and it upset our tummy or whether, the performance has got so many other variables that aren't how well prepared are you, aren't can you improvise over the blues in this key, there's just other things. So I try to remove all that from a performance as well and just make it a reflection of we're playing music because we like to play music, and some people are going to listen to us and hopefully they'll hear that we're having a good time and leave it at that. So that's kind of how I approach that, and that comes directly from that whole idea of, well, the kind of language I use when I'm going over these steps of becoming more confident and engaging in the fun of improvising is I tell them I want to hear them be authentic. I don't want them to approximate what jazz sounds like or what they think jazz sounds like. I want them to be authentic. I want them to sound authentically like what they want to do. And sometimes the stuff that comes out is a little unmusical, but then you can shape that. You can use that in a way that where they can develop that. So, and that's the other thing I think that goes into the process. The process that we're in is developing how we can authentically sound like ourselves uh, when we are free to choose what we're going to play, as opposed to having it all notated when we're going to improvise.
Yeah, at one point, I remember you used the phrase, you want your kids just to make choices. Like
Yeah.
just choose something. It doesn't even matter what your choice is. Just choose to play whatever note, whatever rhythm, right? Just make a choice or choose to not play, right? And that choice is fine, but be okay with whatever your choice is.
And make your choice with intention. That's the other word I use. Like you have to, and you can change your choice. You can change your mind, but do it on purpose. Make a different choice with the intention to do it this way. And that's like the first layer of these games where we'll just pick a note. Everybody choose a note and decide how you're going to play it. But remember what makes music sound good. You have a good tone. You've got, you're going to use dynamics. You're going to play in time. You're going to use rhythms. So you just make these choices, and then when you've played that note a certain way, you might get an idea to change how you're playing that note, and that's valid. That's valid. You're making that choice because when you think of it, that's what improvising is. It's a series of, well, am I going to go this direction? Or am I going to go that direction? How do I hear this? How do I feel this? It's like the great jazz piano player Art Landy. He developed a game for himself to play when he couldn't practice piano. And the game's all about trusting his intuition and choices. It's a game of baseball, but he plays it with a deck of cards. And I'm not going to be able to explain it um, fully because I don't know how to play it. But with the deck of cards, he's assigned each card in the deck a certain outcome. So if he's got a runner on second and a runner on first, he's got to decide before he flips the next card um, what choice he's going to make when that card gets flipped. It could be an out, it could be a strike, it could be a home run, it could be so. And I was having him explain this to me. He goes, "Oh yeah," he says, "This is how I practice improvising when I'm not at a piano, because I've got to just like I can go this way, I can go that way, I can substitute a hitter, I could like change my pitcher. There's lots of things I can do, and then so I'm practicing being intuitive." And I think that's how I come up with some of these parameters for beginning improvisation. Practice being intuitive by making a choice and have intention, and then you can, in that process, you'll start to notice another choice that you can make. And then, well, do you want to make that choice? Well, how would it change the music? That kind of thing. Sorry, that seemed like an awful lot of words for that answer, but I think you.
It's all good. Do you frequently have students play when they're starting improvisation where they're all doing it together, or where they're doing it solo, or the group improvisation versus the you're on the spot improvisation?
I do both.
Yeah.
And I don't do both with consistency. Or maybe I do, I'd have to think. Because some of the games are better suited for the group. So we'll do group, and then we'll do a lot of small group. I do a lot of duo and trio
Yep.
improvisation games, both non-idiomatic and when we're learning a tune. But I do have some really large ones that like a full 18, 19, 20 piece big band can do together that are really fun too. Those are what I call in the notes over here, the soundscapes, or what did I call them? Oh yeah. So some of them that I have done, like we'll talk about, we'll set a scene of an approaching thunderstorm where the day starts hot and muggy. And what sounds could we make that are hot and muggy? And then as the clouds build in and you can hear the thunder approaching from the distance, and then there's one raindrop and then another, and then it builds until there's a downpour and there's thunder crashing and lightning strikes and all this stuff. We'll create that with a large ensemble. Oftentimes what I do with that is I'll use it as an intro for a blues tune on a concert. It's actually really fun.
So you take something that's just a life experience, something they know, and you just turn that into their interpretation of that.
Right. And it comes back to making those choices again. All right. If you're going to be the first raindrop, how long before you're the next raindrop? That's a choice that changes how the music's going to sound and how it's going to feel. And when we get to the peak of the storm, how are we going to notice in the sound that it's time for the storm to start to pass?
Yep.
And for the sun to start poking back, so these are all choices that aren't based in, okay, that is a G7 flat 9,
Mm-hmm.
Your octatonic scale, it's just totally a different set of parameters that get them comfortable figuring out how to make music that has the right character, sound, feel, kind of thing.
Yeah. So before we get into some of those, a couple things that I tend to do in my getting kids to improvise quickly. In concert band, a lot of times what I'll do is so we might have a line of rhythms, like a 4-measure line of quarter notes and half notes or whatever. And then they play it, they're used to playing it on a standard pitch, right? As like a reading exercise. But then I say, okay, well, here's the 2 notes you can use, play that rhythm, but you can use any pattern of those 2 notes and it's not going to sound like the person next to you. Right. And then, okay, let's do it again. Instead of using the 5th and the 3rd, let's now add the 2nd too. So then the next time, let's add the 1st. So like they're playing the pentatonic kind of sound, right? And then I can make the jump to, okay, well then let's use those same notes and then change the rhythm, right? And I've always found that whenever you say 1, 2, ready, go, and there's like 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 kids playing, like they're not shy anymore because everybody's playing. Yeah. And then you quickly, at one point you say, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it with woodwinds only, right? I've done this in band, not even just jazz band, or let's do it with trumpets only or brass only, or, if you know how to read your kids and you get them to just play something and then you just start paring it down before you know it, they're in the middle of doing that. I also use it, Jeff, you and I have talked about having like a 5-minute jazz warm-up or a 2-minute jazz warm-up or whatever, that's sort of like what you do every day, right? And you go through that. For me, part of that warm-up is we're playing 2-5-1s in B flat major, right? The rhythm section is just playing in one key, and everybody basically, like, we have a scale that goes up and down or whatever, but in the 8 bars in between or 4 bars in between, everybody just kind of blows, right? Just giving opportunities for your kids to improvise, even if they're not solo improvising, they're making it up. And I try to liken it to the fact that they've improvised every moment of that day so far,
Right.
Like you haven't planned how the day is going to go. You're improvising this very moment. You're improvising all the time, trusting your choices, and no matter what, you're right. No matter what they're playing, you accept what they're playing. Like at some point, you have to say, okay, that's not the choice you want to make. You want to make this choice, but that's like a much down the line, later down the line thing, right?
Absolutely.
So it's funny. It's like note choices are almost the last thing you care about.
Mhm.
You care about intention and, you know, ratio of notes to rests and eventually style and things like that. But it's almost, I remember I think we both know, all three of us know Trent Austin, and a lot of people know Trent Austin, but he has this great thing about, how he'll solo, but he'll use all the quote unquote wrong notes. Of course, it sounds great. And then he'll use all the right notes and it doesn't sound much different. Right. So, I know Jamie Abersol did so much for the jazz idiom. I actually wasn't around when he first started all of that. But I know there's, I know a lot of people have now like kind of gone back and said they wish he hadn't done everything he had done because it made everybody so worried about the exact chord change at the exact time. Right. And stories I heard, like Louis Armstrong, who we consider one of our greatest soloists, right? He would just take the melody and then play it again, but then play it differently. Mm-hmm. Like, of course, he knew what the chord was, but he was just playing Saints Go Marching In with what he heard. In addition to that, he wasn't thinking about all the harmony stuff. So I think for teachers, when we have kids improvise, if they are looking at chords, make it like one chord, maybe two. You know what I mean? Like the minute kids see chords, they're gonna clam up. I remember seeing slashes for the first time, right? And you're like, how the heck do I play that?
What is that anyway?
And my band director just said, well, just play, right? My first band director just play, and you're like, okay, that's that. So your approach seems much more thoughtful. Yeah. Before we get into all your games and things, Jeff, do you have any things you'd like to add to our conversation?
No, I think we all go about it in different ways. We did it in my district. We started jazz ensemble with kids in 6th grade, and we did a lot of listening, did a lot of call and response, just to break down the inhibitions of wanting to try to improvise. Of course, the first kid says, oh, I can't do that. And you say, well, just play this note and have fun with it. And teaching the rhythm section to keep time behind it so the kids had something to listen to. But one thing we did with modeling was that we would take a section and we'd just make a recording of somebody playing it with one note, then have that same person do it with 2 notes, then 3 notes, and then 4 notes, and then let them just openly improvise and say, showing them a movie of the kid's progression through time. And that way the kids say, listen, I understand that you're nervous about this, but here's where this person started. Here's where they were a little while later. Here's where they were a little while later. Here's where they are now. And then fortunately, some of my kids would say, okay, can I send you a recording now that I have my PhD in jazz performance? And they'd send me a little video and I'd tag that on. And I said, this is 12 years later, and this too can be you. And I will clearly say to you that when this person was playing when they were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, their solos were not of the things you'd want to listen to. It's like you're talking about Trent. And you'd say, well, you wouldn't want to listen to that. But now see how growth occurs. And if you don't crawl, you never learn to walk and you never learn to run. And it's just breaking the barrier of inhibitions and coming up with all the different ways, like Barry said, the games that you have, everybody has a different set of games. My good friend John Mastriani has a ton of games that he uses with the kids that he has. And we'd send kids to a summer camp down in Stamford, Connecticut, and he'd play with John and Tony Cadillac and guys like that. And all they did the whole summer was nothing more than just, as Barry said, breaking down the inhibitions using different ways.
So Barry, how much we're going to get into all your things, but this conversation is leading me into some different questions and things. So I wrote down call and response versus call and copy. I use both of those in my classical rehearsals and in my jazz rehearsals a lot. So can you speak to sort of ideas for call and response versus call and copy, and like maybe how they're different or when you might want to use them?
I use them kind of interchangeably, especially because a lot of the times I'm working with even younger kids. I'll do this with 5th and 6th graders. And in call and response, I will start, or call and copy, I start with just a note or two, of course, right?
Whatever they can play. Yeah.
Exactly. And if they don't quite get it, I'm like, wow, you got the right rhythm. So I kind of let it become a call and response
Hmm.
without calling it that,
Yep.
because they're just going through the steps of noticing, oh, he played the first note, then the second again, and then the first, you know.
And when they're copying you, to have the ability to know, I'm going to play something I know the kids can play.
Yes.
Right. And then every time it gets a tiny bit harder, and you kind of find that, and you kind of push them on the last couple, and then you stop. Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes I'll say, okay, this is going to be like the call and copy that we do, but it's response. You can respond to me like you're talking to me.
And that's freeing, because you can play something harder,
Mhm.
and they can just fill in with whatever they want to fill in.
Exactly. Yep. That's
But,
it.
but
Go ahead.
when they do that, we got to make sure that we understand this, but maybe our listeners don't, that if they don't come back with what you want, don't chastise them. Just say to them, hey, that was good, and maybe you want to try this maybe next time, so that they feel encouraged to go forward.
Well, that's part of the conversation. You only have control over your part of the conversation. The other person has control over theirs. And if this conversation thing is part of the culture of your group, then when they're improvising in, say, a jazz combo setting, you think they're going to converse with each other? Of course they are, because they're used to like listening to each other and copying and going through. So that call and copy I always found very cool, but then the call and response, a different thing. And teachers who, even if they're not in jazz band, you can do it with a lesson, one person, right? You can do it with a concert band or an orchestra, or it doesn't really matter. And if you're a snare drummer, or a xylophone player or a flute player or a trumpet player, it doesn't really matter. You use any means that in order to do that.
One thing that I just thought of too, that kind of, I forgot to mention, that goes along with all of these different things that we're talking about, whether it's the games that we're going to talk about in a minute, or the approach to the process versus the product, all of that, is that with all of the improvising games and the breaking down the barriers, a huge part of it is to start to talk with the kids so they develop a language. So if we did a group improvisation, I go around afterward and I have everybody make a comment about something they noticed that they liked. And it's about building trust with each other. So oh, I really liked it when that trombone came in and did that really cool thing with its slide. And the trombone player doesn't even know. They're kind of embarrassed, but they hear one of their peers say, that was my favorite part of what we just did. That's huge in developing
Confidence.
and comfort and awareness that, yeah, we're in this together. We're doing, this is kind of a cool thing we're doing here. I forgot to say that part.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into some of the games. Before we do that, Barry, name us 5 of your most favorite musicians.
Oh my gracious, only 5?
Yeah, just give us 5 names, just off the top of your head, unplanned, any styles.
All right, Cannonball,
Cannonball Adderley.
Ben Goldberg. I'm gonna try to not think of all woodwind players. Freddie Hubbard is a favorite of mine. Bill Evans, the pianist, and Sonny Rollins.
Sonny Rollins.
And I left off so many that I couldn't live without.
Like, what's your favorite 5 foods? It's like, I don't know. I want all of them. What was the second name you said?
Ben Goldberg. He is an amazing composer, clarinetist. Splits his time between San Francisco and New York.
What's your nickname for the clarinet again? You remember?
Me?
Yeah.
The most perfect thing ever.
The misery stick.
The misery stick, I know.
Oh, no. Perfect is the right term. Perfect.
It's because you can play isn't it because you can play a tritone within like an inch, right? Like,
That's it. Right there. This much tube is, oh God.
Oh, that's funny. Jeff, who are some of your favorite musicians?
Well, Lee Konitz, Horace Silver, Jerry Mulligan, Mantooth, and
Frank Mantooth.
Yep, Frank Mantooth, and Armstrong, Louis Armstrong. I like listening to all those guys.
It's so great. I have some kids right now who are really into death metal, and it's like I hate death metal so much. I try to be open to everything, but it's just so angry, right? But like just being okay with music and just having kids love music. And thank you for those answers. That was great. You want to get into some games?
Sure.
Great. So, of course, the goal of this is that people who are listening. By the way, we're approaching 5,000 listens. There's some people listening. This is great. And in case people are curious, we're gonna make this happen through the summer as well. We haven't talked about that yet, Jeff, when it's gonna be or all that, but we're gonna keep some content going, I'm sure. So let's get into some of these games and see what we want to do. The goal of this is that people can take it and use it, right? So if there's stuff that we don't understand, we're gonna jump in and go. And you have your horn with you to give some suggestions and stuff too. So all right, so we're going to start with non-idiomatic improvisations. Can you give me some shorter words for what that means?
Not in any style.
Yeah.
We're not going to try to play jazz music, or we're not going to try to play the blues. We're not going to try to make it sound anything. No style indicated. No idiom at all.
So that way a teacher could not only use it in jazz band, but could use it in a lesson, in concert band, and orchestra, just so that they learn to improvise. That's
Absolutely.
great.
Because it's all about playing music that you hear in your head, whether it's notated for you and you're hearing it in your head, so you're playing it more in tune, or even when we're playing notated music, we have to be able to conceive of it in our head to make sure we're in tune and in time and with a beautiful sound and all that. So it's just musicianship, really.
So the first one is one note improvisations. Can you give us some background on that?
Yeah, so one note improvisations. Select any note you want, and I don't even call it an improvisation. I said we'll generally start with a group. We're gonna pick a note and play it long, play it short, repeat it as much as you want, but keep in mind, have a good sound. If I count us off, we're gonna stay in time, and remember all the things that you do when you make music musical. You have dynamics, you have articulations, you have all this stuff, and you get to choose all that, but don't choose anything but one note. So if you want, I'll just do and interrupt me if the sound gets funky, okay, and I'll stop it.
Yeah.
So we just take it and, all right, so now, once we've gotten comfortable, it's kind of like what you said, you start with a big group and you winnow it down. Are there a few people that want to try it together and go from there?
I swear, when you picked up your horn, did you scoot your chair back?
Mm-hmm.
I swear when you scooted your chair back, it was exactly the same pitch you just played on the soprano sax.
Now I can't get it to make a noise now.
No, but I swear it made a sound, and then you played it, and it was exactly the same pitch.
That's funny.
The stuff us band directors think of. By the way, any show we do, including this one, all the show notes, because people are listening to this in their car and everything, are going to be right on the website. People can click on it. So if you don't remember these games and you want to go back and find them, they are there for us. So one note improvisation. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I wanted to say before the first one was to any folks listening that have their own apprehension about improvising, lie to your students and tell them that you like it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Don't go in and be afraid of it yourself, because your students, they are so perceptive. They're going to pick up. If you're reluctant to improvise in front of them and you're the teacher, they're going to pick up on that right away, and it's going to be harder. So just go in and be like, we're going to play some notes, and give yourself permission to be okay with that as a band director. One of the things I learned from Peter Martin that I value so much is he said, never stop learning. Never stop getting better at what you do, whether you're getting better at your conducting, whether you're getting better at hearing intonation, whether you're getting better at figuring out what's going on in your ensemble, whether you're continuing to get better as a musician yourself. So if you start off these games and these exercises and you're a bit apprehensive, that's normal, that's fine. Cover it up so your students don't see it, and then you take yourself through the same steps, and you'll see that you will develop the same joy and comfort and freedom to do these things. And over time, it'll just keep getting better for you as well.
And
I get
mistakes are part of the process. We're not worried about making mistakes. It just is, they're just part of it.
exactly. It's just part of it. Yeah. So if you want me to go on, the next one is interval improvisations. And I did not come up with this one. I took it right from Steve Lacy, great soprano saxophonist of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s even. He wrote down every interval possible on the soprano saxophone and cut them into individual little pieces of paper and threw them in a box. And every day he started his day by pulling out one interval and improvising on that interval for 15, 20 minutes. And his goal was to learn the intimate or intricate characteristics and personality of every interval on his instrument, because when you're improvising, what are we making? We're making melodies, and melodies are made of different intervals. And when you're improvising with just an interval for 15 or 20 minutes, you kind of run out of ideas rather quickly. So the other thing he used this for was developing what he called a flexible imagination. So he wanted to practice one interval for 15 or 20 minutes without repeating anything other than the notes. So every time he played the interval, it would be different somehow. And that blew my mind. I thought, all right, I got to try this for myself. And it's a challenge. It is really a challenge.
So when you say interval, do you mean a minor third, or do you mean G to B flat?
G to B flat.
Yeah. So
Two
two
notes.
notes.
2 notes. Yep. And I still use it as a warm-up for myself, and I give it to all kinds of my students to do. And it's amazing how it really does develop both an awareness of sound, like, because if you're going to do like a low C on the soprano and then G with the octave key, I mean, how often are you going to use that in a solo that you're improvising if you haven't actually explored that kind of an interval in isolation?
Mm-hmm.
So it really, it's a great game.
Can you give us a 15-second example of it?
I'll use your 2 pitches.
Yeah.
And then you just keep going.
So are you allowed to add the octave key, or is that a different?
That's a different
Just
interval.
those two.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that neat? And again, it's just sometimes limiting the parameters that you're allowed to improvise with is the key.
Helps you be more creative.
Yep. And it helps you exercise creativity, because it helps you focus on, all right, how can I make that interesting? So that, like, the next step is an interval plus a note. You feel like you've just been unchained. You feel like your wings have been set free just by adding one note. So I'll use the same 2. Now, with this one, sometimes I'll say you have to add the same note every time, or you can change it. So I'll give you the exercise with the note changing. So the interval stays the same, the minor third, G to B flat, and I'm going to add another pitch. So I kept the same minor third interval, and sometimes I added a pitch a whole step above, and sometimes I went down a major third. And it was like, that grows. That exercise has huge growth potential, but it's for slightly older kids. No.
When you do that one, the interval one, and with the added note, do you do that in groups of kids in public school?
Yep. Yep. And we'll do that sometimes where some of these games I mix and match where I'll say, okay, saxophones, you got a one note improvisation, and I'll assign them a note. Like I don't let them choose what note they're going to play.
Yep.
I create a color.
Yep.
Not always like a triad or something, just a color. And then I'll say, okay, trumpets, you are going to do the interval plus a note in improvisations. And I don't assign a note. I don't tell them anything. So it can be really, some of the kids love to find the color of that accompaniment part, and other kids love that it can be really dissonant. So I just let it be that.
Do you find that by doing it that way, that the listening of the kids listening starts to expand rapidly?
Yes, exactly. Because and it happens, I don't even really have to talk about it. It's very organic because there are some kids that really want it to sound consonant with their accompaniment. They just prefer that. And so their ears are finding that sound. And the other kids don't mind that it's dissonant, and kind of some try to find the most dissonant sounds. And so it's kind of like, that is kind of cool. That's really cool.
So the next one you have is about making choices as well. And this is the fourth of the 4 games that you have on here, right? Ignore, mimic, accompany, and cover up. So tell us about that one.
So this is a little farther along in their comfort zone. So after they've experienced improvising some, after they've experienced the talking afterward and hearing how everybody's listening and we're all in this together and there's a little bit more freedom, I use this in a duo form. And sometimes I'll expand it, but it works really best with 2. And so each musician has to make a choice. They can either choose to ignore the other, mimic the other, accompany the other, or cover them up, but they're not allowed to talk about their choice. Like you can't say if it's you and me, I can't go, Kyle, I'm going to ignore you. Nope.
Yep.
Now, and you can change your choice. If we're going along and I'm ignoring you and I hear you do something that I want to copy, I can change my choice and copy you. But the point isn't to play a certain note, play a certain way. It's to make a certain choice. Clearly decide to ignore, mimic, accompany, or cover up. And I explained to them that ignore, that's an easy one. It's actually hard.
You just play whatever you want. Pretend like there's nobody in the room.
Yeah, pretend that you're by yourself. Mimic. I tell them a lot of times that mimicking, it doesn't have to be an exact copy. I said, we all know or have seen on TV some little sibling, stop it, stop it. No, you stop it. No, you stop it. You know, that kind of, and I said, that can be a mimic, or you can try to copy it, exactly. It's fine, doesn't matter. If you decide to accompany, you get to choose what you think sounds nice with it. It's your choice, but you choose. And cover up is kind of self-explanatory too. You just try to cover up what the other person's doing.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
And I'm sure some of our listeners will be thinking about this. They have a jazz ensemble, pardon me, a jazz ensemble rehearsal twice a week, 1 hour each time. How much time of a rehearsal would you use working on these games?
Kind of depends on where we are in the school year. Toward the beginning of the school year, I spend a lot more time on these games than I do when we're in concert season. And still, they're embedded in a lot of my rehearsals even later in the season, because if we're playing a blues, I have games that we learn how to improvise over the blues and the whole kids do it. And they don't have to improvise on the concert, but they do have to improvise in rehearsal so that everybody's learning all this stuff. And again, it takes a while to build that kind of trust and that kind of relationship. So early in the season, early in the school year, I do a lot of it. And it kind of sets the tone. So an hour rehearsal, I could easily see at the beginning of the year, half of it being improvisation games.
And an experienced teacher, you're going through your rehearsal, and sometimes you're like, okay, we need a break from ensemble rehearsal time. We need to kind of open this up for another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you have all these games. I think these kids right now, this is the best one, and here we go.
You got it.
And sometimes it's not even planned. It's just I'm feeling this is the way the class is going or the rehearsal's going, and I'm going to use it.
That's exactly
Where you
right.
want to use some as a recapitulation or your closure. You want to just bring it back one more time so that and tell the kids, hey, if you're hanging in the band room and there's nothing going on, you could go over in the corner of the room and do this yourself.
So this year, that's exactly what happened. Kyle, you got to meet my wonderful Anka Jacobs.
Yes, she was amazing.
Yeah, she laid hold of these improv things and these exercises at the very beginning, and she got together her friends, and every morning, even now, school's like nearly out. This morning, she and four of her friends were in the band room playing out of the real book, just jamming, improvising, and playing. So that makes it easy. Once it gets them engaged and motivated, they start to feel empowered. Like, we're making our music.
Mhm.
They played a gig. Anka's dad hired them. He's a chiropractor. And they played a gig at his office. I didn't even help them pick music. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And these are sixth and seventh graders. So it was really fun. But anyway.
Yeah.
I think the other thing some of our readers or listeners can do is that, if a rehearsal starts at a designated time and it's not during the school day, well, tell them, hey, the band room's going to be open for about 20 minutes before rehearsal. If you want to just hang and play, you can. And I'm going to clean up for a while. So I'll hang for 20 minutes. And you find that more and more kids start hanging, just saying, hey, can I play with you guys just to see what's going on? And the number of kids participating seems to increase.
Yep. Experience the same thing. Exactly.
So that's the end of the games. I think the next portion we're going to start talking about is the blues.
Yep.
That's what I want to say here. What was it? Yeah. So like, people think about notes all the time, right? And like what we're going to talk about ways we can start learning how to play the blues. We have to be thinking about when we want to rest and when we want to play. We talk about making choices, right? And I don't see this on here. I think most of what we're going to do on the blues is going to be like based on the chord of the time, right? But thinking about like, I remember again, Trent and other people doing this where, okay, you're going to improvise, but you can play anything for 2 measures, but then you have to rest for 2 measures.
Yeah.
And then, or you can play for 1 measure, you have to rest for 3 measures or whatever, and forcing them to do that because so many kids just want to play. They just play. And then you have no idea. They don't know what to do because they're not resting. And that resting is very freeing. And what does every kid do when they start improvising? They just play long notes, just like long notes, and they're just holding them, right? And not that that's not an okay choice sometimes, but I always say that that's like when you get up in front of the class to give your presentation and you just keep saying, instead of just letting there be silence, right? So thinking about those games too, playing anything you want for a measure, resting for 3 measures, and making them do that works really well. I'm going to jump in with the Terry White guide to improvisation. This is like if people don't know how to improvise and you want to take a very holistic approach to the blues, what he talks about a lot is just playing the pentatonic scale, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. And then when you get to the 4 chord, I assume people know what the blues are, but if you don't, the simple part of the blues is 4 bars of the 1 chord, 2 bars of the 4 chord, 2 bars of the 1 chord, 2 bars of the 5 chord, 2 bars of the 1 chord, right? That's your simple form of blues. 1 for the first line, 4 4 1 1, 5 5 1 1. And if you can get kids to play the pentatonic scale throughout, and if you can get them to flat the 3rd on the 4 chord, then you are more than 50% of the way home and playing blues, right? Because the real note change is that. So just think about for the second in the key of C. If you're playing C7 throughout, it's all naturals with a B flat, right? The minute you go to an F scale with a flatted 7th, now you have the B flat, but you also have the E flat, which has been flatted. And rather than thinking about it as an F scale, if you think about it as a C scale, but now you have an E flat in it, you're really you're changing one note. If kids get to a point where they can hear that chord change and they can play the flatted third instead of the major third, that's a really, really big difference. Now, when you get to the third line, if you get them to play like the major seventh, like that's a whole other thing, right? But not playing the flatted seventh is a really, really big deal. That's sort of, to me, that's like high school 101. If you've been used to playing for a while, if you can play the blues with the flatted third and then the major third on the 5 chord, that's like a really big deal. Terry talks about listening to festivals and hearing 10 groups, and 9 out of 10, the kids won't even play on chord changes. They'll literally like play the B flat, whatever comes out, no matter what's happening behind. So starting that awareness of the chords is a really, really big deal. Mm-hmm. Can we do a history of the blues real quick? Jeff, I know you need to run, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to say thank you. Barry, it's great to have met you, and I hope to meet you again.
Thank you, Jeff. Good, same.
We should do some clarinet duets. You guys would have a blast.
That'd be cool.
Awesome.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
So what was I saying? I forgot it. My clarinet joke.
Blues.
Derailed it. Listening for the blues. Oh yeah, the history of the blues. So can you give us the whole call and response, the Black Baptist Church, slavery, like all the things that kind of go into that, where the blues come from?
I can try. I'm not as well versed in it, other than to tell you that it came out of a combination. The blues came out of a combination of the call and response of the Black Baptist Church and this movement of, like, during the Jim Crow era. It was so oppressive that Black folks were trying to leave the South or leave the oppression of Jim Crow, and New Orleans, luckily for a time, was resisting that pressure. So a lot of it was going to New Orleans, and these Black folks from the interior South, they had this thing that was very simple. It was 12 measures, 3 chords, very simple form, and it turned out it became what we call the blues.
And even before that, but it was sung before it was played.
Yes.
Right. And as you sing the blues, it doesn't fix your problems, but it helps you deal with those problems, right?
That's exactly right. There's one quote
that was the whole point.
Yeah. If you had the blues would help get rid of the blues or something, right. So it's very optimistic. It was very liberating. And one writer that I read that I really liked, he talked about it being the antidote for minstrelsy, the degradation and the shame of like slavery. That the blues was like the aesthetic that was the antidote for that.
Yeah.
Powerful. It's amazing. It's amazing.
And then I heard, I don't know where I heard this, but that basically when the Civil War happened or afterward, there was these instruments that like ended up being available, right, from the army band or whatever. So then a lot of people who had sung the blues for many years then got these instruments and started learning how to play the blues.
So right? Burns has a section in his documentary on the history of jazz where he said in New Orleans, because this is where it was all coming together, they started to put the blues on their horns, and the people who could play the blues the way the great singers could sing the blues, that's what was happening. That's when it really took off.
Yeah, for people who haven't heard of that, that's from the late 90s, the Ken Burns Jazz series. Okay. He's done all these other things since then and all that too and before, and it's a haul. I mean, I haven't seen the whole thing. 10 DVDs, each one is 2+ hours.
Yeah, it's really well researched too.
Yeah. So that history of the blues really then forms really everything just about everything that we consider American music now.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it kind of everything comes out from that. If you're talking rock and roll, well, that's from the blues, right? And then so people think that jazz or blues is this obscure thing. No, it's like the original American music.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think this is a quote from Ken Burns' documentary that blues is the aquifer from which all American music flows. Mm-hmm. It's like big underground aquifer, and everything else comes from that source. Going? Okay. So from that, we get, as you were saying, rhythm and blues and jump blues and rock and roll and all that stuff. I actually have my 8th graders do a research project on the origins of American popular music, just so I can talk to them about the blues. And it's really pretty fun. It's really great.
All right. I had to scold my son real quick.
Excellent.
It just had to happen.
Yeah, there you go.
So, when we're playing the blues, the basic format of where that comes from is there's the call and response of the first line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there might be some lyrics to that, like whatever. Like, what are some lyrics we could put to the first line of the blues?
My
Man,
dog. Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I want to hear yours.
Man, I love waffles with syrup,
And so that happens again.
right? And then you'd say it again in the second line. Well, I really, really like waffles with syrup, right? So you repeat it, sometimes with a flatted third. And then there's a response to the end of that, right?
Yep.
Well, how
Heading
would the
down to
response go?
Waffle House as fast as I can.
Right. And that sort of brings it around, and that's called the chorus,
Yeah.
right? Now, and I know these days it's very sensitive to start when we start talking about, anything having to do with slavery, right? This is, first of all, you don't need to get into all the everythings about it. You can just deal with the amazingness of what it is. And it's also, you're making a really big deal about this African-American music. I mean, it's our American music, and we're celebrating it by studying it.
Exactly.
So, so let's get into some of the games that you have here under Basic Blues.
Sure. So the first thing I find it to be critically important that they memorize the form as soon as possible. So I give them 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and I've got it divided so that into 12 bars, and I've got the Roman numerals on there for them. And we start by just memorizing the roots. And we'll do a whole bunch of improv games just using the roots in groups all together. Okay, now we'll try this rhythm, then we'll try that rhythm. And they will memorize this form, so they don't need that sheet in the first rehearsal on the roots.
Right. And so you use Roman numerals, so they're starting to think about scale degree rather than just the note. So that you could, at some point, if you decided, you could say, well, let's do this, but we'll do it in a different key.
Exactly.
And they should be able to access that.
That's not as foreign to them. It kind of helps them with those steps. And then I'll add the second note, root and the second, which is the ninth, right? So we'll do the same thing. We'll do predetermined rhythms, predetermined notes in this order. And I call this data entry. And once we get the roots and the seconds, we start to play games with it. And that's when I bring in, like you were talking about. You can choose to play the root or the second on any chord, but it has to be the root or the second that matches that chord. And you can rest. You can play one of the notes. You can start on the root. You can start on the second. All that is free. But remember, how do we make music sound good? You got to play with a good sound. You got to play with articulations. You got to, all those things. Mm-hmm. And this is where I have it right in here. You can leave out any of these tones you want. You don't need to play all four. Well, that's getting way ahead. Rest for a whole measure or even longer. All those things where they're like just getting comfortable hearing, oh, I don't have to play that note to know where I am.
Right.
I can let that go by and come in over here.
So often kids will get lost, right? They're like, oh, I don't know where I am in the form. Mm-hmm. Typically, if they play less and listen more, they hear it. Yep. Right. That's why my mom always said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you'll listen twice as much as you talk.
That's really good. I like that. So the whole idea of getting lost, I tell them, right, when you don't know what you're on, you can't play a note. You've got to just listen. See if you can hear it. And if you can't, give me a sign that you can't hear it, and I'll show you a finger or something to help you. Oh, we're on the one. One's coming up right now. Yep. And that's all fine because they just get comfortable trusting that. Yep. And then, of course, over time, we build in 3 and then 1, 2, 3, 5. Mm-hmm. And again, with all these sets of, okay, you don't have to play all 4. Sometimes I want you to for an exercise. We'll warm up and we'll go ba-ba-doo-dum, 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 ba-ba-doo-dum. We'll do warm-ups like that where we
And
practice.
you can practice playing the first note long, slurring the middle two notes, and accenting the last note. So you work in your articulation practice
What I do,
along
yeah.
with that.
And then when we go to improvise, I'm like, now you change it. This was an exercise. This wasn't improvising. And I call it data entry. This is just helping your mind and your ear make the connection between the sounds I want you to learn and the sounds that you can manipulate and use when you go to play your solo.
Could they then play that same exercise, but then they make up the number pattern within that?
I might go, ba-doo-dum, 2 and 2 1. Not use all 4. 2 and 2 1. And over time, my braver kids will actually sing. They'll sing the tones. 1 2 3 5. 1 2 3 5. And then I'll have certain kids play a background using 1 2 1 2 3, while other kids get to solo, so that they're always just getting this sound, because it takes a lot of repetitions, as you know.
And if you have them do a background, you can easily say, all right, trumpets, play the root, and let's
Yep.
go. Somebody come up with a rhythm, or you give them bop, bum, bum.
Yeah.
Then the next time it's like, hey, would two of you play the third instead of the one? So then you get like some harmony in there too.
Exactly right.
So, I mentioned earlier flatting the third on the 4 chord.
Mhm.
That's like a completely different approach, right? That's just changing one note when the chord changes rather than thinking of a whole new scale. Right. So there's value in doing that as well. I could see how that could get confusing for kids.
Mhm.
It's like you kind of have to pick one lane or the other. I find that when I know I don't have as much time with a kid, I kind of pick that change one note.
Absolutely.
Only one note's going to change in the whole scale,
Mhm.
where 7 of the 8 notes are the same. But then when we have more notes, I feel like I get into something like that. I mean, more time with them. Might do this a little bit more.
Yep. And then this just keeps going. Sometimes I use the same system, the same idea with my college students. I had,
But it's all the things you are versus the blues, right? It's
Yeah.
just a different tune.
It's giant steps. I mean, and then listen to what Coltrane plays on giant steps. He's playing 1 2 3 5 1 2 3 5 1 2 3 5 1 2 3 5. It's like, that's what kind of gave me the idea. I remember being in college when I transcribed that solo. I thought, I know what he's doing.
Okay, so I have to take a quick detour
Okay.
because you just triggered something in my brain. Using transcriptions in an easy format within jazz ensemble charts.
Mhm.
So there's anytime you're playing a tune you're playing a jazz band, I'm assuming it's like a standard jazz tune, like a blues or Summertime or anything like that. There's, hundreds of thousands of solos that have happened over that. So for example, if you're playing Freddie Freeloader, there's a Michael Sweeney arrangement where the trumpets get to play 2 choruses of the Miles Davis famous solo of that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really cool. You can just do that arrangement and those kids get to do that. But I always thought, well, why can't more kids play that? So what I would typically do, say I was doing a tune and I thought the kids could handle it, I would then find a transcription from that tune and then write it out for the whole band. So I think you heard my band a number of years ago when we did the grade 2 chart on Solar by Miles Davis. Rick Stitzel did it. If people don't know Rick Stitzel, he's like one of the best arrangers for grade 2 and 3, I think. And anyway, in the middle of it, I just inserted the Miles Davis solo. And I think it was remember the instruments I used? It was clarinet, flute, soprano saxophone, and voice.
That's awesome.
It was like the wildest thing. And they played 3 choruses of Solar on this transcription. Well, those kids were freshmen and sophomores, and they weren't really at a point where they were going to improvise on that tune at that time. But it was a way to get the jazz language in there. And it's really simple. When you get to the solo section, just have the rhythm section play what they have and then insert whatever as long as it works with the form of what it is, right? To get that language in there. And then you start getting kids seeing about transcriptions, and then they start saying, well, that's really cool. I want to do more of that. They start listening more and playing more.
Yeah.
And I actually once I had a judge come up to me once and say, "Whose arrangement is that? I haven't seen that before." And I was like, "I just put in the famous," and they went, "Oh, yeah, I knew I recognized that."
Great.
So I encourage people to do that. If it's you're playing blues or tunes, just find solos your kids can do. We did that with Sacco Woe and Cannonball. There's a great solo for Sacco Woe, and you throw that in there. Can you tell the people a little bit about Cannonball? Because I think there's some people who don't know who Cannonball is.
Cannonball Adderley was one of the most remarkable saxophonists of all time. He was a band director in Florida, and his brother was a cornet player in New York City, a jazz cornet player, and his brother's name is Nat. And Nat was like, Cannonball, you got to come up here. You got to come up here. You got to move up here. You got to move up here. You got to get up here. So finally, after Nat's urging, Cannonball left Florida, made it to New York City, and this is a Phil Woods quote. First time I heard Cannonball, I thought, oh, blank, there go all my gigs. I thought it was bad when Bird was still alive, and now this guy Cannonball's moved to town, and he's just an amazing um, improviser in the sense that Beethoven would spend how many months or years perfecting one of his compositions, and Cannonball was improvising music as sublime and as powerful and as deep just on the spot. Beautiful sound on the alto saxophone, the best.
To me, you could tell he listened to the great bebop artists, right?
Oh yeah.
Like he sounded like Charlie Parker, but with like a soul aspect of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I hear when I hear him play.
And he just had this patience. When he would solo, he was a master at building a solo. He would just start off really patient, but it was really engaging from the moment he started. But patient is the word I keep coming back to, because he wasn't like trying to put it all in there right at the start, and then he would just build this masterful 4 or 5 chorus long thing.
And sometimes the first couple choruses are very playable.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not the last chorus, but
that Sacco Woe solo, it was just the minor pentatonic scale. The first 2 choruses. It's just he uses D, F, G, A, C. I remember that one. It's like, but it's so good. Because and why is it so good? Because he was making the choice. The intention was there. The artistry was there. It wasn't random. He wasn't being simple because he didn't know what to do. The intention was there.
And there's some great charts that have been arranged of his stuff in the last 10 years. Terry White has a chart on Jive Samba, which is technically a red cover first year. That's a really cool one. Sack of Woe, we've talked about. Mike Kamuff has an arrangement of that. And then my favorite tune of Cannonballs, I don't know if you know what my favorite tune of Cannonball is. It's a tune called Sticks.
Oh, yeah, that's a great tune.
Sticks is a B-flat blues, but it's a 14-bar blues, which sounds complicated. Your kids will eat it like it's candy. Like, it's the coolest tune ever, and it's in B-flat. And Mike Kamuff has an arrangement of it, actually. But if check out Sticks on YouTube, and you'll hear like the coolest, like, I don't know. It's just the coolest music.
Have you heard the live in Seattle recording of that?
Yes.
That's the best music in the world. It's unbelievable. So good.
So those some great arrangements of that. But again, to me, doing the arrangement, that's just a vehicle to get kids to listen to Cannonball.
Right.
So you're doing them a disservice if you just listen to the arrangement. Like, the arrangement is doing us a really good service, but now listen to Cannonball,
Go down that wormhole.
And this is kind of a dumb question, but the saxophone company Cannonball, what is that in relation to Cannonball?
None.
No relation. Interesting.
No. Isn't it? Yeah, none.
Okay. So you have a bunch of numbers down here that people can see if they want to do this. I find that when you use one of these numbers, 1, 2, 3, 5, but you start on something other than 1, it makes it a heck of a lot harder.
It does. It does. So you'll see that I got 1, 2, 3, 5, 2, 1, 3, 5, 3, 1, 2, 5, and 5, 1, 2, 3 in blue. That's because I start with those.
Yep.
Then, depending on the level of the ensemble. Some rehearsals, I'll draw one of these out of a hat and say, okay, we're going to go through the blues and we're going to play 2-3-1-5, and they'll scuffle with it, and that's okay. Go ahead.
Yep.
They're always there for us to draw on. Now, my college students, they have to master these for me. Like I was going to say, I have a junior. Well, he's now a senior, where he had to go through all these permutations on giant steps for me. And that's hard.
That's hard.
You know what? It transformed. Just because he did it, he doesn't have to do that on every tune. And he chose giant steps. I didn't.
Yeah.
I generally recommend that they do something like Autumn Leaves.
Right.
You know, a major 2-5-1, a minor 2-5-1. Boom. You go through this on Autumn Leaves.
Yep.
It's going to transform your understanding of how the harmony moves and how to use motives and things like that.
Can we just pause for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think what you just said is a huge thing that a lot of teachers don't know about.
Oh, right.
Okay. So I just want to break, because I saw a clinic 10, 12 years ago with Chris Oberholzer, and this changed everything when it came to jazz improvisation for me. So many years ago, they would have one chord for 8 measures, and they would just play over one chord, and it just didn't move as much. But then they started doing these things called 2-5-1s. So it's just pretend we're in the key of C and it's all white notes, right? If you play D minor 7, it's all white notes. G7, that's the 5, all white notes. And C major 7, that's all white notes. And those 3 chords are called the 2-5-1. However, the entire format is really one major scale. Right. D minor 7, G7, and C major 7 are all C. So if you can like take those 4 bars and just play over the key of C, that demystifies all of it. You don't need to play D minor. You don't need to play G7. You just need to play C. And that brought a lot of interest to the harmony and the sound, and gave the rhythm section stuff to do and the horn players things to latch onto. And you know it's 2-5-1 because it goes minor and then dominant, right? So like D minor and then G7. And then a major chord, usually, not always, but usually. But so if you spot that, then you can, if you can find a 2-5-1 and isolate what scale they're playing on, then that you can play over all of it. Mm-hmm. And in minor, it's the same thing, but the 2 chord has a flatted 5, right? Because of the way the minor scale works. So it's like D minor 7, flat 5, G7, sometimes other things, and then C minor. Well, that whole 4 bars is C minor. Right. So if you can go through any of these tunes as a non-jazz teacher, quote unquote, and just take Autumn Leaves or any other tune and just decide like, okay, I want to figure out where the 2-5-1s are and write them out. And you're just soloing on major scales.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's when I learned that, I was like, improvising is so much easier than I thought it was. Because I was trying to chase every chord tone of every chord.
Yeah.
So that to me was a revelation.
That's great.
So sorry for that detour, but that's big.
Yep. So that's what I use those for. They're just, and depending on the level of the band, we'll do more or less of them, or the level of the student, they do more or less of them. And there's this amazing pianist down in New York right now. Jacob Sachs is his name. And what he does is he takes this, and then after he's mastered a tune with 1, 2, 3, 5 in all of their permutations, where are there? 24 of them. He'll say, all right, now I'm going to drop the 1 and add 6. And he'll do the same tune doing 2, 3, 5, 6. Wow. All right, now I'm going to drop the 5 and add 7. So 2, 3, 5, 7. All right, now I'm going to, and so it can just keep growing. It's like this endless way to explore harmony and creating your own melodies over these chords.
Well, what I think is wonderful about your teaching, Barry, is that you have this very basic way of teaching something, but you have this infinite number of levels to wherever the kid's at, you just move to that level and you can teach them.
Oh, right there, exactly.
Because how many of us teachers get to a point where a kid is so good and you're like, I don't know what else to do. You know what I mean? Or if you're used to playing with teaching good players, then you have a kid who's really young, you don't have the ability to make that kid better. So that skill that you have, I hope, is something that a lot of people are going to start getting more of, and more of us, right? A beginner all the way through a professional. Can you do something to help them?
Yep, exactly.
There's a great video on YouTube of, have you seen this, of the great Jacob Collier? And he said, where he explains harmony to 5 levels of musicians. It's this 15-minute video, and everybody, you have to watch it. He explains harmony to a 4-year-old, and then to like a college performer, and then
Yep.
and it gradually goes up. And then level 5 is Herbie Hancock. He's sitting with Herbie Hancock and they're talking about harmony.
Oh my
And it's
God.
just this ability to like take harmony from this basic level up to this crazy, like you're sitting here like I'm watching two giants talk. I don't even know. It's a 15-minute video that people need to check out. Jacob Collier explains harmony in five levels or something. It's so good.
I'll definitely check it out.
The last thing we have on here is the talk about guide tones.
Yep.
Guide tones, I think, are huge. I didn't know about these until my second year teaching, and Mark LaForce came and worked my band, and he's like, your kids are playing everything in root position. Why don't they use the guide tones? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So could you discuss guide tones, what they are and how we use them?
Sure. I'll go back to the blues. Okay, so the guide tones are based on the third and the seventh of the chord.
And why the third and the seventh?
Because the third and the seventh are the notes that determine the quality of the chord: minor, major, dominant, half diminished. Well, not half diminished.
Yeah.
I think you need the 5 for that one. So if we're playing blues in C, your guide tones, the one that starts on the third will start on E. And every time you have the C chord, you're going to play the E. Now, when you switch to the 4 chord in the 5th measure, the guide tone is not going to go to A, the third of that chord. It's going to go down a half a step to an E flat.
Yeah.
So the guide tone lines generally move, when they move from one chord to the next, they try to move by the smallest interval you can. And a lot of times it's a half step, occasionally a whole step.
Yeah.
So the third of the 1 chord becomes the 7th of the 4 chord.
And the 7th of the 1 chord becomes the 3rd of the 4 chord.
Of the 4 chord, right. And if you continue that, you go, so we're on the 4 chord, on the 7th, it goes back up a half step.
Let's go back to the beginning. Pretend like you're playing piano.
Yep.
Let's pretend we'll do 2 notes just like we're playing piano. So like you have E and B flat.
Okay.
Okay, over the C chord. And then we go to the F chord.
And the B flat becomes A and the E becomes E flat.
Just goes down a half step.
Down a half step. And then back.
My 5th grade daughter right now plays in jazz band, and that's how she plays.
And that's what she does, exactly.
Yeah. And it sounds like a pro.
Yeah. And the only difference that I have my middle school piano player do is I add the 9th or the 3rd. So it'll be
like 3, 7, 9.
And it sounds great.
Yep.
So then when you get to the 5 chord, your E goes up to F sharp.
F goes up to F, right? Because they're going to a G chord.
Oh, right. Yes. So the E goes up to F.
Yeah.
F natural for the B flat goes to a B natural.
Yeah.
So
you go up a half step.
Yeah. Just half step motion.
Yeah. And if they can do that with their left hand as a piano, right, then you can add the thumb for the 9th, which is a really cool sound. Yep. Something's called the miracle voicing. You know the miracle voicing? Yeah, so that's like the first thing you can have a kid do. But even then, every jazz band chart, when you see these big like chords, it's just the 3rd and the 7th plus a bunch of other stuff, right? And plus
the 3rd and 7th.
And plus, when they play the 3rd and 7th, then they can improvise with the right hand over that 3rd and the 7th.
Right.
So then, basically, having them solo on E and then E flat and then E and then F and then E, or B flat to A to B natural.
I'm pretty sure I had taken a lesson with this wonderful, this great jazz bass player, Ben Street. I was still in high school. And he introduced me to guide tone lines. And his comment afterward was, listen really closely to Charlie Parker, because that's all he's playing. But he just figured out the most creative way to do it.
Yeah.
And so when you really start to listen, all the approach tones and all the other things that Charlie Parker's doing to creating dissonance, he's surrounding the 3rd and the 7th of every chord pretty much, which is really cool. So oftentimes I'll use the guide tone lines as backgrounds on blues solos because they sound really good and really simple. And that's just another way to get those sounds into the kids' ears so that they're familiar using it.
And the horn players are basically playing the piano chords.
Yeah.
Just by, like when you listen to a lot of Harry Connick Jr. big band stuff, there's no piano in it because he's singing.
Right.
So like the horns are all the background. So that's right in the jazz idiom.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that the guy tone thing is definitely, I think, higher level than the stuff that we talked about. But I feel like this conversation took us from, you know, I know almost nothing and I can improvise and teach improvisation through some of these other things.
Yeah.
How can people, if people want to reach out to you and get more information about your thoughts and things, how could they do that?
bsaundersmusic@gmail.com or bsaunders@msad51.org. Those are my two emails. And I think that would probably be the best way to start. And I'm more than happy to field questions. I get a lot of, especially during the festival season in the spring, I get a lot of emails from band directors. We're doing this song. How do I help them? Are there 5 notes I can show them to play over the whole song?
But again, if band directors understand 2-5-1s, then you can do that yourself. You can say, oh, it's 2-5-1 here and then 2-5-1 here. And then if it's too hard, maybe don't do the tune or change the chords.
Right. That's another thing I've told some of them too, is well, you can take all those chords out and just have this, and it sounds really great. So yeah, I'm available and willing to flesh out more of this for anybody that is interested.
And what's funny about that approach too is that people won't notice that you took the chords out, or the people who do notice know why you did, and they respect you even more for changing the chords.
Oh, exactly, because well, you know, what's one of the big catchphrases in education right now? Scaffolding, differentiation. If it's too hard, break it down into smaller pieces so they can be successful. That's how we teach. That's not cheating, that's teaching.
Absolutely. Those are words of wisdom.
Yep.
All right, Barry, this has been fun. Thanks for hanging with us.
Fine. Guess where I'm headed?
Where?
Golf course.
Oh, lucky. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have the time, we highly recommend the After Sectionals podcast for more great listening. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director. See you next week.